Hello, greetings from Modi'in, Israel. In this video I'm going to talk about Pesah Sheni with a special focus on Aliyah L'Regel, that is the pilgrimage that our ancestors used to make 3 times a year to Jerusalem. So what is Pesah Sheni? Just to recap, in the Torah God tells Moshe to tell the people of Israel that if someone is unable to bring the Pesach sacrifice on the 14th day of the first month, either because they are impure or because they are too far away, in the Torah's words, b'derech rechuka, then they are allowed to make it up 1 month later on the 14th day of the second month. And the question is asked in the Mishna, how far is b'derech rechuka? How far is too far that if someone is at that distance they are entitled to use Pesach Sheni? And the prevailing opinion there is that of Rabbi Akiva, who says it is a distance from the temple to the town of Modi'in, and a similar distance in any direction from Jerusalem. So the Gemara explains what's the significance of Modi'in. The answer that's given is it's about half a day's journey from Modi'in to get to the temple, and therefore if someone left first thing in the morning, they were already at Modi'in, they'd be able to reach the temple by the afternoon and finish their sacrifice before sundown. If they're any further, they wouldn't be able to make it in time. Indeed, I checked Google Maps, and from where I am now to get to the Temple Mount, they say it should take 7 hours on foot, which is about half a day. So personally, I've always been curious about Rabbi Akiva's words. Why does he mention Modi'in specifically? He says it's the same distance in any direction. Modi'in is to the west of Jerusalem, but he could have picked a town to the north, to the south, to the east. He also could have just said half a day's journey. That's b'derech rechuka. So in order to shed some light on his words, I came up here to this hilltop. It's known as Gibata Titora Hill. And the story about this hilltop, as you can see behind me, those are buildings and neighborhoods of the modern city of Modi'in. There were actually plans to build and develop on parts of this hilltop as well, but in salvage excavations done in the 1990s, there were significant archaeological remains that were found from different peoples over different time periods, spanning thousands of years. In a court case that reached the Supreme Court of Israel, it was decided, therefore, that this should be kept as a nature reserve / heritage site. And I want to look specifically at remains from the end of the Second Temple period, the time that Rabbi Akiva would have been familiar with. He would have been just a young man when the temple was destroyed, and he also lived nearby in the town of Lod. So behind me you can see some replicas of ancient agricultural equipment from the Second Temple period, and that gives you a sense of what was here at that time. Just a modest agricultural village, things like wine presses they found, olive presses, but what's most significant for us, I'll show you just a little bit further down this path. Next to me are a pair of cisterns. Here's one, there's another. Cisterns are called in Hebrew borot mayim. They're just pits for collecting rainwater. And they found a ton of them here, around 180 cisterns, which was a lot more water than the local inhabitants would have needed. So it was realized in the context of the history, the location of the place, also the Mishna that we mentioned, that the extra water was for travelers, for pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem. This was a place where they could come and rest, drink, give their animals to drink, perhaps buy supplies from the locals. There are also mikvahot found here, so if they need to purify themselves before they go to the temple, they could. And what we're looking at, therefore, is not just a village, but also a way station for travelers. And perhaps it was known at the time that Modi'in was the sort of place that if you reached there by the morning of the 14th of Nisan, you'd be able to get everything that you needed to reach Jerusalem within a day. So what I'd like to suggest, based on the discoveries, is that the criteria of Rabbi Akiva is not necessarily just about the distance, it's also about the supplies, the level of preparedness. If the morning of the 14th of Nisan arrives and someone doesn't have everything they need, they're not prepared to complete the journey, they can't be expected to get to Jerusalem and bring the sacrifice before sundown. And therefore they should be allowed to try again 1 month later on Pesach Sheni. Down in the valley behind me you can see that's Highway 443. It follows more or less the ancient route to Jerusalem, winding through the hills. But in ancient times, the trip was not nearly as easy as it is today. It was something that like most worthwhile journeys in life, required planning, preparation, perseverance, and also support from people along the way. So on Pesach Sheni, a day that we don't really do much to observe or commemorate, I'd like to suggest using it as an opportunity to think about the journeys that we've made on our lives, or the ones that we're still on, and appreciate the people who helped us along the way, our supporting cast, people who provided us with the supplies, the tools, the guidance that we needed in order to reach our goals. And of course, my prayer is that next year we should all be able to celebrate Pesach in Jerusalem.